So, okay, this is my introduction, and I represent here the Joint Research Center. So I guess this would be, yeah, fantastic. The Joint Research Center, as Santiago just mentioned, is part of the European Commission, is in fact a big part because it's a DG with close to 3,000 staff, and we are spread all over Europe. A big chunk is in northern Italy, in Ispra, which is not the Italian Agency for the Environment. This was an unfortunate duplication of names, but we are in fact, very close to Lake Maggiore. But there are other research establishments in Karlsruhe for transuranium chemistry, and in Sevilla for perspective studies. In Brussels, we have a headquarters, and then we have something in Gale, Petten, and other places in Europe. So we are very happy to host this conference, which is really manifest the way in the Commission we like to work, in a sense that we have the policy DG represented by Santiago and a technical DG represented by me, putting our energies together where everyone does what he does best. In this particular instance, the cooperation we have with Santiago is called CRIE, the Center for Research on Impact Evaluation. We exist since a couple of years, and we really aim to bring together not only our own expertise, but also the expertise of academia, and to act as a sort of a bridge for the Commission services. In this case, mainly DG Employment, but possibly others in the future. And the focus is really on labor market policy. This COMPIE conference is hosted in this very peculiar quarter of Rome, which is very much unlike Rome. This is what we Roman call the Square Colosseum, Palazzo della Civiltà. I'm very not happy to be here because I got my high school diploma a few blocks away, precisely in this quarter. I'm Roman. And in this conference, really aim to put together, as Santiago already mentioned, not only academical people and policy people, but also civil society stakeholders and different parts of the European Commission itself. Why is all this so important? Well, I would try to argue with you in my short introduction that evidence-based policy is at a kind of crossroad. Something is about to change. Something is changing. And there are a number of powerful drivers for these changes to take place. One is that we live at times which are full of controversy. I remember having worked for more than 30 years in fields related to environmental policy and assessment, at a time when only some issues like GMO and climate were controversial, so to speak. Nowadays, if you read the media, almost everything becomes controversial. Every issue, and most issues involve some kind of scientific dimension into it, become the subject of controversy. In the UK, you may have heard the story of culling the badgers. Then there was the story of BM pesticide, the huge dispute between Germany and France on the cooling liquid for Mercedes-Benz, whether it could be used, what it could not. And all these things fill the media. And in all these controversies, science play a role, statistics plays a role. On the other side of the Atlantic, the fate of children raised by gay couples, the cost for citizens and for illegal immigrants also is the subject of a very hot and partisan debate and squabbles, which have at their heart evidence, data. But this is also times where the trust in the institutions, which are supposed to look after these things, seems to be dwindling, seems to be disappearing. How can I make it? Well, you have my word that this is the first time in my professional life that I quote the church, but in this is a speech from our Pope Francesco to the European Parliament in Strasbourg the day before yesterday, I believe, in where he clearly says that we seem to have a problem in our European institution. The appeal of this project seems to have lost some of its appeal, and the citizens perceive that they have in front of them a kind of aloft bureaucratic, blind bureaucracy intent on following its internal procedures and blind to the need of the individual citizens. And that's why, in a sense, COMPIE is so important, because the kind of technique, the kind of approach we have is really on the ground with the citizen. We really try to see what's happening. But there is also another issue here, that not only trust has been dwindling with respect to the institution, but also about science itself. You may have seen the cover of The Economist. This was last year. How science goes wrong is very strange for such a normally conservative and positivistic journal to speak like some postmodern philosophers, but this is precisely what they did. And this is in fact a big story, and I wish I had a talk in this conference to talk about that, but there is really an issue now with the quality of the scientific enterprises. This comes from far away. This was foreseen by many people, by Lyotard among many in his book La Condition Postmoderne, the loss of legitimacy of knowledge and science when science becomes industrialized. Miroski wrote a beautiful book 3 years ago, Science Mart, on this, which is very interesting and describe very carefully what's going on. Things are now so bad. I mean, most of you are not natural scientists, so you may not have an idea what this is about, but in medical research, it appears that most of the results of preclinical cancer trials are wrong. So you may happen to be sick of cancer, to receive a treatment, but the treatment won't work because the preclinical science was wrong. And the preclinical science was wrong because the arrangement for this research was not the one, an optimal one. And now they are now quoting article of this year, of these days, in the meta research centers are created to try to look into science, to try to see what is reproducible and what it is not. Someone like Ioannidis says that 85% of research funding is wasted. I really wonder how our colleague in DG Research would take this news if this number were to be the real number. And in the same in organic chemistry, there is a group of bloggers who keep now set an activity to replicate organic synthesis because simply you cannot believe in organic synthesis when you read it in a chemistry journal. You see that I'm a chemist, okay. But this is not only in natural science, also in social sciences. Famously, Kahneman said, I see a train wrecking looming, you know, a train is about to crash because he was also worried by similar trend. Let's say all the story about the non-reproducibility started in the social sciences, in the behavioral studies, for those who have followed the story. And then this story has also many normative angles, because as I said, if those results are not reproducible, it's because the arrangement which produced them were not optimal. And Stiglitz made a big description, a nice description of how this happened in the field of the pricing of the derivatives, which led to the present great recession. So the issue was with the incentive of the mathematician doing the pricing, that the pricing was not, was really fantastic. And then, you know, you have other stories which we could continue, but the most famous of which many of you have heard, possibly the one of Reinhardt and Rogoff, the story of the 90% ceiling of public debt, above which countries would become functional. Pity that this result was later on found to be only depending on a bug on an Excel spreadsheet. And I show here you the New Yorker to tell you that these things are not confined to academia. It's not things we discuss among us, but these are things which are discussed out in the civil society. And of course, the point is that policymakers, especially the Austerians faction in the institution on both sides of the Atlantic, made a big use of this result to say that countries needed indeed to consolidate their debt, but the results were wrong. And then everyone said, I said the New Yorker, here you have the Financial Times. We make a parallel between the discussion between Galbraith and Friedman when Galbraith said to him, the misfortune of your policy is that I have been tried. And unfortunately also the policy of Reinhardt and Rogoff have been tried. Okay, so again, ethics plays a big part in this story. Science doesn't work between proper ethics. I'm now quoting a very old book of Jerry Ravetz, brought in 1971, a book everyone should read, especially the people in impact assessment, because it has a fantastic chapter on the application of immature and ineffective discipline to the solution of practical problems, which really opened my eye. Marie said that indeed, he forecasted in 1970 that we would have a problem down the road in quality control unless proper mechanisms were put in place to ensure the quality of the scientific enterprise. And this had ethics as a fundamental point. Okay, also, you know that uncertainty is now routinely fabricated or concealed by opposing faction, depending on the convenience. You may have heard about this book where they describe how tobacco companies try to increase the uncertainty on the health effect of tobacco so that legislation could not be enacted to limit tobacco use. If you read, like statistician, you may be more inclined to read the article of Limer, Tantalus on the Road to Utopia, as in Utopia, where you described the similar discussion between on the effect of death penalty on crime rate in the USA. So really, an instrumental use of uncertainty is very common in kind of antagonistic discussion on the adoption of policy. So all this to say that it becomes very difficult in our line of business to distinguish between evidence-based policy from policy-based evidence. Okay, so given this, can technique help? Of course, technique in this case can help. It's not the solution, it's part of the solution. Clearly, if you apply a counterfactual method, at least you achieve a degree of transparency. Maliano business is sensitivity analysis, where I look at transparency of mathematical models, and I can tell you that a counterfactual analysis is much more transparent than a mathematical model when you look at the inference. Trust, so because this technique is parsimonious and has a simplicity at level of understanding, can be better used in a policy discussion. Imagine that you have to debate a policy on the basis of the outcome of a mathematical model, as opposed to based on a counterfactual. Makes a big difference in terms of how much you can trust the result. Legitimacy, because necessarily you need to involve the stakeholders if you want to and Santiago just mentioned, the partnership meeting. You really have to talk to people and convince people in each and every member country to go and do these things, as opposed to formulate a model with some, and then some differential equation up in Brussels. So this really, I think, is helpful. And then, and this is my last slide, I hope we are moving toward a new culture of evaluation, whereby we will not longer see ex ante and ex post studies as two separate entities. Our group has been arguing for a long time that if you want to do a good ex ante impact evaluation, you should at least have at your disposal some good ex post study. The same policy must have been tried somewhere else, and this must have been done with some kind of counterfactual. Otherwise, what are we talking about? I'm pretty happy that in the guidelines we received from the new president, this principle has been explicitly stated. And from what I hear from my colleague in the Secretary General, now this is the way we will try to do things. So thanks to all of you for being here.